So yes, I'm going to talk about perceptual coding a little bit, about quality a lot. This is a choice that I made listening to you the last 2 days, and a bit of content features and complexity. Yeah, so video coding at machine learning era, or let's say deep learning era. We had a wonderful session already this morning. We can go on the right-hand side of this slide using disruptive playground, going full deep, and that's super exciting, and many things are interesting there. Or we can remain in a standard playground and use some kind of hybrid approach, use symbolic, statistic, deep learning, fully compatible with existing codec to try to improve them. And we can do that to design models that can predict either optimal ad hoc transform. We had an example of this, not yesterday, but optimal partitioning, optimal syntax prediction, signaling, and so on. So you can use deep stuff for that. And we did a few things on that front a few years back. I must say, yes, something about video coding at machine deep learning era. That's great. This is great that we have these tools because we have to deal with a lot of data. And when we are doing media coding, we are in front of a hyperspace of possibilities. We have more codec. We have to deal with codec complexity. We have more type of content. Can be professional generated content, user generated content. And we have a lot of new viewing experience, which are mostly technology push. It can be HDR, white color gamut, VR, AR, Preview.tv, and so on, or ultra high definition. I know that most of you are absolutely aware that any result that has been presented so far is operating in somewhere in this hyperspace of possibilities. So you can present that some recipe works, but they work maybe for some contents, for some type of codec, for some type of viewing experience, and probably you need to redefine things if you want to really generalize. The things that you might be less aware of is this, and that's kind of yes, interesting to me, is that the same thing applies for image quality. And most of the work that I have seen in that forum are using some kind of metrics, which have been proven to be very efficient in one part of the space. So for some type of content, some type of viewing experience, and some type of distortions. And the question is it reasonable to use a metric which has been validated in one part of the space in another part of the space without having any proof that it can be generalized? So that's kind of questionable, and yes, that's something maybe you people in that forum should look a little bit more closely, especially when I see the difference of different RD curves that I have seen. Maybe it's kind of questionable. I will come back on that later in the presentation. Initially, I wanted to present you some of our current focus in my group that we are running, and especially with the support of some AOM partners. And I will remain on the standard playground, okay, not the disruptive one. So our current focus address either red distortion complexity optimization, UGC encoding recipe, pre-processing coding optimization. All these things are related to somehow how can we characterize better the content. So it's kind of approach where we try to define techniques, and especially we use artificial intelligence to do that, to do this type of tricks. And the thing which is the other side of the thing which is kind of important to us, it's about image quality metrics, and especially design a video quality measure for context resilient coding. I'm not sure we'll have time to present that. What is context here? It's viewing distance, viewing conditions, light conditions, display condition, and so on. Something I didn't see in any talk so far. So can we design video quality metrics that are context resilient? And another thing is that we need also ad hoc testing methodologies when we try to get the feeling or the opinion of observers, and we can probably boost this with artificial intelligence. I will propose some. I will show you some few examples in line with this. I think that Alex Tourapis will like this one if he's still here. But yes, it's about, again, video quality assessment. It's a matter of use case. It's a matter of where you are in the space. And you have to be very cautious when you are using the tools out of their context. And you have to know also why are you using why you use a certain video quality metric. Is it for local or global optimization? That means inside the codec decision or long-term decision for long-term period. It's a matter also of quality range. Are you seeking for wide quality range or subtle difference? It's a matter also of a use case and how the media is exploited, display, viewing condition, and so on. So for video quality assessment, we talk about video coding at a machine learning era. For video quality assessment, we have also ways to take advantage of most of the advanced machine learning techniques. We can boost subjective testing, developing active sampling techniques. We can improve metric learning using, again, active sampling techniques. So that's a recurrent question that I have heard also the last 2 days. Do you find the complex example? Do you have an example where it doesn't work and so on? How can you identify that? Active sampling is something that can help you to do that. Okay? So a strategy to do a statistical approach or a strategy to identify what are the complex problems, what are the complex use cases, what are the weaknesses of your system. And of course, nowadays also to develop a video quality measure, people are adopting some kind of deep learning techniques. So you are facing a problem like data augmentation because you cannot work with a lot of data in that field, and some are tempted also to use full reference metric as a notation and so on to develop this type of metric. I'm going to be fast on this just to give you a flavor on things that we are doing in line with content characterization. So first of all, some evidence and something we presented, but it was quite long time ago, to try to have a kind of a optimization goal that combine both rate, quality, and complexity. And with the observation that if you go in that special space, when you plot the 3 criteria, you can see that depending on the content, some configuration will work better than some others. So you might be interested, can you analyze, characterize the content beforehand and then apply the right configuration depending on the goals that you have in terms of rate, distortion, and complexity. So for this type of things, we are adopting a framework where we extract some features, local features. They can be spatial, temporal, luma, chroma, and so on. And from this, we try to estimate what is the best motion range, what is the best predicting block size, the depth, and so on, to using a black box approach, and then we can eventually improve the red distortion complexity optimization problem once we have well characterized content. I must say that in this type of approach, of course, the computation of the features of the content is a part of the complexity. So we encounter for that, and we can get decent results. Something that we have recently looked at is trying to find good recipes for user-generated content. And that's something that we do jointly with Facebook. So we try to now better understand how a content, a UGC content, react to different type of encoders, and trying to characterize directly the RD curve. And the question is that when you get new content uploaded, UGC content, can you classify it immediately as belonging to a certain category with respect to the red distortion curve, and eventually apply the right recipe? Just to give you an idea of how we explore this type of framework. So first of all, we wanted to use only explainable AI. That means that we exclude deep learning techniques from the beginning, and we put onto the grill different algorithm for the classification of BD red distortion curve first, and for the feature selection, because we can have a lot of feature as a candidate, and we try to identify which one are the best. So for this, we use different type of algorithm, either for classification or either for feature selection. Among all the features that can be useful, we try to apply different algorithms that try to estimate what are the most useful or the most informative or the most decorrelated features. Okay. Results are cooking. Stay tuned on this front, because we will publish a few things in the next month. So the need for content characterization, and then the need for good new video quality measure. I just want to take it's a bit similar to the talk that we had right after the break. Here we study the problem of pre-processing content-based coding evaluation. So we develop some kind of techniques that try to also that are very perceptually friendly in terms of pre-processing, but to evaluate this type of techniques, jointly working with a coder, we need accurate quality estimator at given operating points, and that's the key point here. We don't need quality metrics that correlate well on the wide range of quality. We need something which is very subtle here. And to benchmark this type of pre-processing, we use a subjective test as a ground truth, but we need also a very discriminative subjective test. So we are not going to use ACR, DSIS, and so on, but here we use a pair comparison as the one that was proposed, actually used in the talk of what was the name of the techniques? I forgot, sorry. Eyesight, yes, I'm so jet lagged. So, eyesight, yeah. So yes, pair comparison is the way to go. Just want to remind you two things. You can benchmark this. You can get the RD curve, and you can transform pair comparison into Bradley score. Any subjective score comes with confidence interval, CI, and that means that you may have optimistic estimate of the gain that you have, or a pessimist one, if you take into account the different confidence intervals that you get for your different configuration. Anyway, these are in some sequences applying these pre-processing techniques. The gain that we can gain in average in terms of delta rate, and you see that. Okay, one thing I should mention also. These techniques take into account somehow the context, in the sense that the pre-processing may be tuned to different viewing condition and especially viewing distance. The problem is that most of the metrics that we have on hand do not have viewing distance as an input parameter. They have been probably tuned and parameterized for one viewing distance, but if you want to check what's going on, if your pre-processing techniques works, let's say, for 3 times the viewing height of the display, viewing distance, or 4.5, you may get different results. Okay. Anyway, this is what we get in terms of gain from the subjective test. And you can see that PSN, it's not a surprise, because this is not a metric which is really tuned for this type of pre-processing techniques. VMAF, which is one of the best metrics that we benchmark at that time, and that has been also well put in the light during these 2 days. You see that if we use VMAF here, we lose part of the gain that we can really achieve with human observers. Okay, so we can, let's say it's underestimation up to twice less than what we can get again, actually. So that's not neglectable. And for this type of scenario, the most accurate metrics that we could find was actually HDR VDP, a visual difference predictor, because we are really playing with gene. Okay. Codec and dynamic coding. So when we want to select optimal resolution and frame rate, there is also content dependency. Okay. And we have uncertainty. Uncertainty, actually, we can put any RD curve. You have uncertainty if you use a subjective test. You have confidence intervals in any point that you're going to measure on this RD curve. And you should never forget that your metrics that you are using, SSIM, MSSIM, VMAF, and so on, have been validated on ground truth, which is uncertain, the subjective test score. So that means by design, these metrics have also a kind of confidence. When you get one number, it might be something else according to the subjective test. So the question is, what is the metric resolution power? And when you plot your RD curve, you should always also add this type of double curve to measure the accuracy. In the case of dynamic coding, when you are particularly interested by this crossing point, actually, if you take the positive, the optimistic or pessimist estimate of your metric, you are in a window of unknown. And what you wish to have is a quality metric that minimize this window of unknown. Okay. So, yes, we need to develop meaningful video quality measure. I want to make a strong statement here. Most of the metrics that you have seen and that you are using are validated measuring the correlation coefficient as a figure of merit of the metric correlation coefficient between subjective score, the predicted the MOS, the mean opinion score, and the predicted MOS. Okay. And usually they are tuned on a range of quality which is kind of wide. So you see here, you can find a kind of correlation between MOS and predicted MOS. But if you look the things a little bit closer in that window, it's not correlated at all. So we need, what is a meaningful metric, especially in the case of developing new video coding? We want a metric that say, if A is better, if A is of better quality of B. So it's mostly a pairwise problem. And that should be addressed as such. So you don't want to know if things is correlated on one range of quality. You want to check if I change the recipe, if the quality of this new recipe is better than the quality of the other one. So it's really a pairwise problem. So, and especially it's important if you want to work in a narrow quality range. So how can we improve the confidence interval of ground truth, namely the mean opinion score? That's one thing that we should work on. So that's for the subjective testing point of view. And that's a way to redefine also the problem. We want a metric that gives close score to for qualitatively similar pairs and distance scores for significantly different pairs. So that means now we take into account the confidence interval. And we want also metrics that give higher score for significantly preferred stimulus. Okay. So just few insight of what we have done on that front. So it's pair comparison, A/B test, but there is an art of designing this and analyzing this. So it's not just taking the pair and making ANOVA. You can go further than this. You can, first of all, transform any pair preference matrix that tells you the probability that each stimuli is going to be preferred over another one into a continuous and hypothetical perceptual continuum. And for this, we have different techniques to do that. Bradley-Terry, Thurston-Mosteller, and so on. Most of them use a maximum likelihood estimation. Even if you can use this, you want to boost that because pair comparison, if you want to test everything, you may lose some conditions, or there may be some conditions you don't want to test that much. Let's say you know very fast with few observers that stimuli A2 and stimuli S3 are very far away. So you don't need to test that a lot. But nevertheless, if you have two stimuli which are very close, you wish to put more experimental effort on that stimuli. That's why we developed some kind of a boosted pair comparison test methodology, named as adaptive square design, and it has been standardized at ITU and IEEE, and that's a way to focus your experimental effort in conditions that require more observers to get confidence. And eventually, you can improve the, I'm looking the guy who presented yesterday on behalf of Bristol, when you had these numbers, remember there was 2 conditions over 36 where you can make the statistical significance, you are still slave of the confidence interval that you have in your experiment. If you use this type of techniques, you can reduce the confidence interval and be more discriminant between the condition and your recipe. You can go one step further, and that's the things that we published at NIPS last year. Try to find active sampling techniques for pairwise comparison, and especially when we have to design batch and we go for crowdsourcing experiment, how we should design the batch, focusing on the pairs that are going to bring most of the information to be discriminative. So this framework is based on different things. It's active learning according to Bayesian theory, KL divergence, and also that help us to define expected information gain. And then we use minimum spanning trees that help us to form the different batch. The thing which is interesting here, this active sampling that helps to know more from humans can be used also to better train machine. And that's why also it was very well received by NIPS community. Okay, so we can improve the resolution of our subjective test if we can eventually get more data with active sampling strategy, but we need also to have better benchmark way to benchmark our image quality metric. So I mentioned already the problem of correlation coefficient. I could mention also the problem of RMSE, which is another way to measure the figure of merit of a metric, but that requires to do a mapping between subjective test scale and objectives one. And on the top of that, neither CC, correlation coefficient, neither RMSE take into account the accuracy, the uncertainties that we have on the ground truth, the confidence intervals that we get from the subjective test. So we need to do something else. And once again, we can define this problem as a pair comparison things. So this led to this framework proposed by Krasula when he was one of my PhD students. He's with ARM now. And basically, from a data set, you can always form 2 types of group from data that you get annotated video with quality score, whatever it is, ACR, DSIS, DSCQS, pair comparison, and you can form 2 groups. Those for which you can make statistical difference, and those for which you cannot make any significant difference. And you can run this type of analysis, and you check for 2 pairs the difference of the objective measurement that you observe with PSNR, with SSIM, with MSSIM, and so on. And you wish that the metric is able to separate these 2 groups, the one for which you cannot make statistical difference and the one for which you can make statistical difference. You get also another indicator here. You can define this type of thresholds, and this threshold tells you for the metric scores difference, providing 95% probability that the image are significantly different. Okay? Just to give you an insight, if I apply this framework with SSIM, I could take any metric. I pick SSIM because I have seen a lot of this today. SSIM on the live data set, the threshold that I get is above 0.15. 0.15. That means that if you observe a difference of less than 0.15 on 2 conditions with SSIM, with the data set on which it has been validated, you cannot be sure that the stimuli are actually different. So when I see curves, when we observe difference of 0.01 SSIM, it's kind of questionable, okay? But I picked SSIM. I could have done the same for PSNR, but you know already the answer. And I could do the same for VMAF. I could challenge any metric with that, okay? With respect to the ground truth on which it has been validated. So be cautious. I know you are engineers, you like numbers. You need numbers to say, yes, it's better, it's worse. But you are engineers. And because you are engineers, you should question the probe that you are using to measure your improvement. So better try to qualify better your probe and say, what does it mean, this number? Can I say safely that I have an improvement. That's something very important. The other part of the network is once you focus on significantly different pairs, you may have pairs, okay, for which the observers, it's clear there is difference, but the metric says that A is better than B, while the observer said the other way around. So you can form, again, two distribution and check how the metric are able to separate these two distribution. Right? Okay. So coming back to the problem, once you have qualified, so yes, I should say that this thing doesn't take care of methodology. It can take any input data, and you can always transform the data, taking care of confidence interval, and doesn't need any mapping or whatever, or transformation of the subjective score. So coming back to the problem here, that's a way also to estimate the uncertainty of your metric, the metric resolution, and to have better confidence here. The thing which is interesting, you can run this framework also per quality range analysis. So you can see in which quality range your metric is efficient. You may find out in some case that one metric is more useful in one part of the quality range, while another one is better for the quality range, which is opening also a way to combine metrics nicely according to the quality range. You can apply also this framework on different type of content. So you can do per content analysis. And last, you can use also this type of thing to train objective metrics using multiple data sets, irrespective to the rating scale that has been used, because any data set can always be transformed, saying that according to observers, this image was of better quality than this image. And once you transform everything like that, the beauty of the thing is that you can combine all existing data sets to retrain metric to help you to improve their discriminability or resolution power. If you are interested by that, you can look this proof of concept that we did with Netflix to retrain a little bit VMAF. And if you want to know more detail about that, you can ask Z how we apply that. With that said, I have no time to touch this problem. And thank you very much for your attention. Can take any question if you are not hungry or hungry. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Have you done research on, do you have an opinion on no reference quality metrics?
I have an opinion, yeah. I've done a lot of research, but I have an opinion. You can do non-reference metric in many cases and for many use cases. Once again, it's a question of use case. I like to take the image enhancements use case, because this is something which is, it's always kind of strange to me to see people who try to train non-reference metric in the case where in your data set, you have only, you have a reference image, a pristine image, and you will have only distorted version. And the problem that you have to face in image enhancement is that most of the time you increase the quality. And the way to touch that, it's again a problem of content dependency. How do you gonna tune your image enhancer according to the content? And for non-reference, I think you are really operating in subtle different space. So the figure of merit should be also somehow reflecting these pairwise things. We had this discussion was it this morning? This morning for breakfast, I'm super jet lagged. Yanis, you had your definition of good quality.
I'll let you go.
And your definition of good quality, yes, if people think it's good, it's good. It's good as long as you don't bring them another reference. I can take a picture with my smartphone. I'm not going to say the brand. I think it was delivering good quality till I see the picture delivered by the mobile phone of my friend, and then say, no, this is good. Not mine is not good anymore. So it's a matter of reference. I could have shown you also. Can you?
broken it.
I broke it. Let me see. So non-reference is a complex problem, but where methodology cares. Once can you just show slideshow? Okay, very interesting. Tone mapping operator and preference. So it's about HDR, high dynamic range, and in any case, you will have a display that will perform a tone mapping operator, and you may wonder you may ask the people which one do they prefer. So you have different TMO strategies. This is a setup that we use at that time. So we had a pretty bright HDR display in the center. This is a reference, more than 4,000 nits at the time of that experiment, and two SDR condition, but performing TMO, and you have to pick your preference. So we can form the preference matrix. We can use the adaptive square design I refer to. This is and once you transform the preference matrix into Bradley-Terry score, so you get this hypothetical perceptual continuum. The higher, the better. And you can compute confidence interval also in this domain, but that's MLE stuff. This is what's happening when people have access to a reference. That means the display in the middle. And this is what's happening when they don't have any reference. Okay? And you can see, for instance, for these two images, that this is tone mapping operator strategy on x-axis. One is preferred over the other one when you get access to the reference, but if you don't have access to the reference, it's the other way around. So methodology definitely care, and most of the time, what is the reference? We don't have access to non-reference. When you capture something, where is the reference? So that's So yes, my big warning is that define your use case. Be cautious with the tools that you are using. Use appropriate subjective testing methodology, and then revisit eventually the metrics according to the ground truth that you have collected. But I can discuss more about non-reference. It's
Okay, fantastic.
They're hungry.
They're hungry or angry?
Angry? I don't know.
That was fantastic. Yeah.
No.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.